Awesome, awesome. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Johnny Poitras. Coming to you all from Somers, Connecticut. Assume most of you all may know, but I actually just met someone from Glastonbury this past weekend, and they had no idea where Somers was. So it is right next to Enfield. If that does help anyone out. So coming from y'all from a couple different angles. So we're gonna kind of focus today on risks of retirement. I'll share with you a little bit about myself, different background that I have, some areas that I'm passionate about, what we're going to mainly be talking about today. And then as we kind of go through, feel free to ask any questions. I'd like this to be interactive. I know over Zoom, it can sometimes just be like someone's talking right to you, but I also will leave us some time at the end as well to ask questions. So if you're saving any questions and things like that, and then I'll also share my contact information as well if you also have more questions too. But so first piece that I just want to kind of share is that this information is for informational purposes only, is not intended to be personal financial advice. Please consult the appropriate professionals, whether it's a financial advisor, attorney, CPA, or whoever it may be, when going about this is in information or this journey for yourself, I should say. So the first thing is I am coming from a background of I am a financial advisor. I do specialize in the helping individuals get ready for retirement, financial planning for that stage of life. I also help individuals as well with the Medicare process as well, figuring out which plan may be the best option for them, helping them plug in doctors' prescriptions, drug lists, things like that. So that's currently what I do right now. My background is in psychology, so one of my areas of passion on the side a little bit is I do like the psychology of money, things like that, our financial behavior for lack of a better word, and I'll kind of bring a little bit of that into this presentation. So I'll kind of talk about that as well. But I think the really important piece to keep in mind as we go through this is that everyone has a different situation, right? Some individuals may be more hands-on with their own situation. Some individuals may need some help with their situation, but also be hands-on. Someone's also like, hey, let this person just take care of it. I want them to handle all of it. So I think the big piece that I'd like to kind of get across to you all by the end of this is first off that you all are thinking more about your own situation. That's obviously why you're here, but to also kind of navigate, well, what do you need during this process, right? Or if you're here on behalf of someone else, trying to support them, what do they need, and how can you best support them, or how can you best support yourself during this journey? All right, so let's kind of move along. So the areas we'll be kind of focusing on are different risks of retirement, and I call them risks, and that's usually what we prefer to call them in our office as well, is because you can see that there's different areas that of retirement that if we aren't focusing on or aren't aware of, we can miss something, or we could have a penalty, we could have this that we weren't aware of, or there was some little area that we wish we knew about, we didn't know about, right? There's a lot of different small areas. So when we talk about risks of retirement, I talk about these different topics up here. So we have Medicare, income planning, budgeting, income tax, inflation, long-term care risk. So you can see we have a bunch of different options up here. And now breaking down each of those, right, we're going to break down each of them and go a little bit more in detail on them. And specifically, some of those risks are that I've noticed, some that I've heard from others, and just from my own experience and from what I've seen with others as well. And just to remind you as well, too, please don't be afraid to pause me if with any questions, whether you raise your hand or you can put something in the chat, and we certainly can address that as well. But the first, what we're going to start off with is we're going to discuss, we already went through that. Yes, we already went through that, is Medicare. So for those who have not started the Medicare journey, for those who have, you may know that it can be pretty stressful sometimes navigating when to sign up. What are the enrollment periods? Do I have a special enrollment period? Can I sign up after 65? Will I get a penalty for doing that? How does it work? What's this prescription drug coverage? I have a friend who got it late and they got a penalty for it. Why didn't they know that? So there's a lot to Medicare, right? So when we're talking about one of the risks of retirement when it comes to Medicare is when to take Part B, for example. And without going too in depth on that, because I have a whole other presentation too on Medicare that I could kind of discuss if you had more questions about that down the road, where because Medicare itself is a big topic, as all of these are a big topic, but I'll kind of keep it vague, is when to take Part B without penalty. And typically, just to give you some background on that, when you turn 65, you have a 7-month window to get on Medicare, 3 months before, 3 months after. Now, if you don't get on Medicare Part B during that time, you can get a penalty or prescription drug coverage. Now it gets a little finicky because some individuals may have an HSA, they may be working past 65, they may also want to keep working full time up to like let's say 68, or they may be on their spouses. So how does that work? So there's a lot of complexities to navigate in that area. On top of that, yes, I discussed a little about the HSA, how that can be a complication. Also, making sure that your doctors and prescriptions, for example, some of you may have heard that there's original Medicare and a Medicare Advantage plan, right? So with original Medicare, it's just your Medicare card, you pick up a supplement, and you don't have to worry about a network, right? And if any of these terms too, folks, please feel free to ask questions and I can certainly pause and explain more what I mean by that. But so you have original Medicare and Medicare Advantage. With the Medicare Advantage plans, basically the way it works is you have an insurance company managing your plan. So you want to make sure that if you do have an Advantage plan, are all your doctors in network? Are your prescriptions on the formulary? It's important to keep in mind all of that. Um, in terms of the Medicare Savings Plan income-related monthly adjustment amount, that's also an important area too that I've found that a lot of individuals don't know about, especially the Medicare Savings Plan. So just to give you all a little bit of background on that, the Department of Social Services in the state of Connecticut can help pay for some of your Medicare, depending on your income levels. Now, roughly for individuals, it's about $3,088, I believe, for individuals. For joint two individuals, I believe I want to say around 4191. It's right around that monthly, and that's before deductions as well. So that's something people can keep in mind, and you apply through that through the Department of Social Services. Basically, it can help you pay for your Medicare. On the flip side, though, there's also something called the income-related monthly adjustment amount, where it's the opposite of that, where if you make a lot of money, then you have to pay more for your Medicare as well. Um, all right, let's see. So we talked a little bit about that already. All right. If anyone has questions, feel free to unmute on the Medicare process. Does anyone have any fresh questions on Medicare as I have it up right here? We can also save that towards the end too, if that is helpful as well. Um, I know it's a lot when you're talking about Medicare. This one is definitely a lot to it. And we know this last year there were a lot of changes too. Some of you may know that the donut hole was going away, right? And how that how that has interrupted different plans. What I would also like to share too is it's also important to keep in mind that these Advantage plans, if you are on an Advantage plan or a prescription drug plan, right, they change each year. So one year your prescriptions may be the lowest cost on this plan, but the next year it might be different on another one. So I also would say it's important definitely, to take a look at your options each year and see what plan options there are based off of your own information and your medical history and your preferences too. I do have some clients who they could be saving a lot on their prescriptions, but they're like, Johnny, I don't like change. The motto, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So there's also definitely some preference involved in there as well. So the first prong that we kind of talked about was Medicare, right? And the risks of that can come along with it. And obviously we're just talking about a couple. We're not going too far in depth. And as if we go back, we'll kind of go back to this piece right here. And this is where it's important for you to ask yourself this question of how much help do you want and or need during this process, right? And I'll bring this up a couple times because some of us, right, we're like, I like to handle all this on my own. I don't want a financial advisor. I don't want someone to help me with Medicare. I do my taxes on my own or whatever it might be, right? Or some of you are like, you know what? I like going to a CPA for my taxes. But I like to manage my own money, So kind of navigating what do you feel like you need during this process, I think is a very important question for you to ask yourself. Some of you may be like, yep, I need everyone. I want as much help as I can get. Others are like, I need this or that, or really depends on what you're comfortable with, and also your own knowledge base as well. All right. So the next piece is income planning slash budgeting. Have you set up a clear budget, where you talk about how much money you're going to need this month based off of how much money you're getting from different sources, whether it's Social Security, whether you're getting a pension, right? How do you take that pension? Are you taking it, with your spouse or just yourself? Like which options are you picking for that? Is a lot to consider when we're thinking about, right, income planning for retirement. So with an income plan, some individuals, you either can go to someone for that, You sometimes can find software online for it too, or some people like, the good Excel sheet. If you like Excel sheets, I see some people who love their Excel sheets. So if you know how to use those can be pretty great for navigating that. But just something where you know where your money's coming from, where you want to be pulling from, which buckets of money you want to be pulling from at different times, and how much money you're going to need, right? Do you need X amount of money to be able to pay for a mortgage? Or did you pay off your mortgage already, right? Or what happens if you're going to need to buy a car 10 years down the road, right? Do you want to pay for the car, or do you want to have to take out a loan on that car? Kind of things like that. It's important to think about that and navigate. Well, what's going to happen years down the road if we need to take money out of this bucket or that bucket? And we'll kind of talk too a little bit at the end about long-term care planning and how that kind of works as well too a little bit. But let's see. All right, so we discussed that. Does anyone have any questions about this kind of piece right here when we talk about income planning slash budgeting? Um, I'm curious to know the stats too on how many individuals do come up with a budget or a formal income plan because it's a lot to kind of navigate that. That might actually be something I look forward to doing down the road to have actually a stat in here. All right, let's see. Okay, so income tax. Another risk, so something that I am not familiar with because I am not, well, I'm familiar with, but it's not in my scope, right? So this is not something that, I'm able to really do much with, but depending on your situation, right? You may want to have a CPA a part of your team. You may want to have that tax expert. Some people like to just do it through Turbo. Some people like to do it through, one of those websites like them and H&R. It really depends on your situation and what you're comfortable with, right? I think we hear sometimes in this field that it's like, oh, this is the one way to go. This is the one right answer. But the truth is typically there's a lot of different tools out there, right? When we think about building a house, right? You need a lot of different tools, and you have some of the tools that can do the exact same thing, but some people like that tool or some people don't like that tool, right? And I think that similar analogy also applies to this area as well, right? Some individuals may be like, okay, I do want to have a CPA help me out with this, or maybe I just want to go to that CPA just there, and maybe they can help me navigate this, and then from there, I feel like I can take it from there and go on, go do it by myself, or I do like to go in person. Again, this all goes back to kind of what I was sharing with y'all before. How much help do you feel like you want and or need during this process, is important. All right. So let's see. So just a couple areas that I kind of shared on here. A lot of individuals worry. They're like, oh, where are the tax brackets going to go down the road? Will I have Social Security? How is that taxed? Required minimum distributions, that's also something important for people to keep in mind as well when we think about tax. And in terms of required minimum distributions, that also did just change. For those who are looking at this number, they're like, wait a minute, wasn't that 72 recently? So about a year or two back, that did change. So that is also something to keep in mind as well for those who have those qualified accounts that they need to take out of by 73, or starting 73, sorry. All right. Any questions about income tax from anyone or about this piece right here? All right. So let's see. Let me just move my screen over. Sorry, I can't see. So the next risk to kind of keep in mind is inflation and stock risk, right? So what we have here is just a chart that kind of shows different compounding interest amounts, right? And just showing a couple different numbers, and I'll explain that in a second. But when I talk about inflation and stock risk, what I mean by inflation risk is obviously we all know what inflation is, right? Inflation is, you're losing value on the dollar over the long run when you keep money, when you just keep money and not really do anything with it, right? Now, then when we think about stock risk, we're also like, okay, well, the stock risk is that we put our money into this asset, right? And what happens if it goes down and doesn't do what we want it to do, right? So we know that there's this idea of risk versus reward, right? So when we take a look at some of these charts over here, oh, sorry. Let me see. I keep having to move this around. All right, let me just hide this screen right here. Perfect. There we go. All right. So when we take a look here, we can kind of see that when we look at inflation, right, and it's averaged about a 2.52%. If you held, let's say, $1 million cash, right, which, I'm not sure, is that common just to hold that, but, let's say we're holding that, and you see a 2.52 inflation each year. You can see that there's two charts here, one that has a negative 2.52% and one that has a positive 2.52%. And you can see how over a 30-year period, the value of the dollar, right? So your $1 million 30 years down the road in this hypothetical situation, right, would be worth about 465,000. Um, so a lot of individuals, when they see it, they're like, oh my gosh, okay, that's kind of nerve-wracking, right? That's why they kind of call inflation the silent risk, right? Because you don't see your money going down, but because of inflation, it is going down over the long haul. Now, sorry about that. Now, when we take a look at stock risk at the same time, similar to what I was sharing with you all before, there's higher risk, right? But there's not guaranteed reward, right? Well, that's actually a good point too. I want to share with you all because a lot of times people assume that higher risk equals higher reward, which isn't the case, and also that you can't guarantee that either, um, and how that kind of works. But any questions on inflation or stock risk? As I kind of have this on here. Because I will share one other piece at the bottom when we talk about impacted distributions over investments. And what I mean by that is when we go back earlier, we talk about, for example, required minimum distribution. It's important, one risk is that, let's say, for example, you're 73, you have to take that required minimum distribution, or say you're 76 and you have to take it, right? So and the stock market's down, for example. Let's say you have money in the stock market, and it's down. And you're like, wait a minute, I don't want to have to take money out of a pot that's down right now, right? But you need to take your required minimum distribution. So that's also, a risk to consider. And again, I'm not saying have this amount of money here, this amount of money there, but more so just to keep in mind that there is risk involved, obviously, with each, but there's pros and cons, in how you navigate that. And also, it's important to consider, okay, well, what could I do then if I don't want to have money in a down pocket? What are other options, things like that? Or if you're like, heck, I'm okay with riding that up and down if I need to take those RMDs out, right? I understand the pros and cons, but it's important. It's important to consider all those different angles, as you are navigating these waters. All right. Let's see. So that's just a little inflation chart, kind of to share that negative 2 point, or I did a negative 2.52%, just so you could all see kind of how that looks over about a 30-year period. And that was just, I believe, a quick little Google search, looking at inflation over 30 years. I would take that with a grain of salt because you'll find different numbers and answers in different areas. And I believe I have the source at the end, so we could look at that too. But that's just a 5%. See what a 5% would do over time. All right. So we talked about that. Um, so another question that kind of comes up a lot is individuals who are afraid of the stock market. That is very common, right? And I think it's also important for you to navigate. Again, we go back to that question earlier is, let's see, when we go back to this here, how much help do you want and or need during this process? It's important to recognize that, hey, you might not even want equity exposure, right? You're like, hey, I understand this inflation thing, Johnny, but I'm really afraid of the stock market? So it's also important to recognize that your peace of mind is very important too, but also recognizing, hey, like this inflation thing, how it kind of works and how that can impact you over the long term and things like that. A lot of moving parts to consider, folks. I know it's a lot to think about, but so that's kind of that piece. All right. So our last point here is long-term care planning, right? We know that there's a lot of options and tools here, whether it's picking up a policy, whether it is picking up long-term, short-term care policies, things like that, putting in meeting with an attorney to go over different documents that you can set up, utilizing different insurances. There's a lot to take a look at, and a lot of it is very dependent on your situation as well. Um, Typically, when individuals are sitting down and planning, an individual wants to think about, okay, what happens with my spouse, right? If someone needs to go into a nursing home, or what if I'm living alone and I need to go into a nursing home, or what if I want to, go to assisted living, right? And navigating all that. And that's where it kind of goes back to that income plan, what I was sharing with you all before, is being able to look at it and say, hey, obviously none of us can predict when exactly if we need to go into a nursing home or a skilled nurse or assisted living facility, sorry. But what would happen if I was 85 and I needed to go into an assisted living facility? What would happen if I was just to pay for that out of pocket, right? Or what would happen if I had this policy here? How would that kind of work, helping me navigate? this whole process and being able to figure out um, if you'd have enough money for that, or if you'd be able to be at this assisted living facility for 3 years, and then from there, what would you kind of need to do, right? And I would say that this question right here, this topic of long-term care planning is probably one of the most difficult ones, right? Because we have no idea, like what our future is. Whenever usually sit down with someone with Medicare and we're trying to figure out what they want for the next year, for those options, right? It's hard to navigate. What exactly their health is going to be that next year, right? Because sometimes our health is it's great this year, but we're like, well, what's it going to be 10 years down the road, right? It's like none of us has that crystal ball. So it's also important when we talk about people a part of your team, right? We talked about CPAs, we talked about a financial advisor, right? We talked about an agent who may be able to help out exploring different Medicare options. Now, we also talk about an elder law attorney as well, right? And some individuals may utilize them, some may not. I think it's important to know that these are also individuals that can also be a part of that team. Um, so I think aside from that, just shared with you all a little bit of contact information, and I'll open up the chat a little bit to see if anyone has any questions. Aside from that, I believe that that's all I got on that piece. So I'll open up the chat for you all. I know we have a couple individuals on here, so if anyone does have questions, feel free. You can unmute, you can write in the chat, or whatever, or if you'd like to connect to, send me an email as well as I could help out too. I'd love to be a resource for if I can answer anything. But yeah, Joseph, I see you unmuted. Oh, I think you muted yourself again. I can unmute you, or I can help you try to unmute.
How's that?
All right. Yep, I can hear you now.
As a general rule of thumb, in terms of Medicare Part B, is can people who are working full-time get that or not?
People working full time. Now, are they on their group plan? Are they still on their group plan?
Well, I mean the normal, you know, the normal health care, health insurance and so forth, yes.
Yeah. So individuals. So I have if this answers your question, I have individuals who are on Medicare B, and they're also working full time, and they're not taking their group plan. I also have some individuals who are working full time and on their group plan. Depends on your situation, how the coverage is at work, what you kind of prefer. It really depends. I've had people go both ways with it.
But for a person who has, their company's health insurance and they're working full time,
Mhm.
once they stop working full time, would that be the time in that scenario for Medicare Part B?
Yeah, so typically there's a window, and I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, so I don't want to give you all a wrong window. But typically, individuals, what they'll do is if they know they're retiring, let's say at the end of February, right? They'll get their group plan. They're 68 years old. They've been working full time. They've been working full time, covered by group health or qualified group health coverage, and they've had more than 20 employees at that site. Then typically, what they would do is they would sign up for Part B for March 1st, is typically what they would do, and then they would get on whether it's they would get on Medicare for March 1st. Now, what some individuals also do as well, but this is kind of confusing if you have an HSA. Some individuals will get on Medicare Part A just when they turn 65, because for the most part, if you've been working full time your whole life and paying taxes, you wouldn't have a premium for Part A typically.
Okay. All right.
Any other questions that anyone has? Um, I know we covered a lot of material, and I know we just kind of jumped into a little bit. Um,
I've got a question.
yeah, absolutely.
Retired, um, what's the most cost-effective way in regards to taxes of taking distribution? Or
So
is it
unfortunately, I can't answer that because I'm not a tax person. So what I would say is you'd have to ask a tax person that question.
Okay, yeah, from what you said earlier, I wasn't sure if you'd know, but thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Stu, but I appreciate you asking that.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any other questions? Awesome. All right. Well, I hope at the very least, this was able to get you all maybe think a little bit more about your situation and hopefully navigate, what areas do you feel like you need some support in? Because I think that that's important. It's a very transitional time with retirement. Usually people, they laugh when they see me on here. They're like, "Oh, this guy's talking about this transitional period of retirement." But I've spent some time working with individuals, and it definitely is a big transitional period. And there's a lot to consider, a lot to navigate. And I think it's important for, in the end of the day, for you to get peace of mind, but also doing what you think is best for yourself, right? Everyone has different situations. You're going to hear some individuals tell you, do this, do that. But, I think it's important for you to figure out, hey, like, I want this help in this area, or maybe I need support in this area. Um, it's totally dependent on what you're comfortable with is I think the most important. But I appreciate you all taking this last half hour out of your day to stop by and listen. So thank you so much, everyone. And don't be afraid to, if you have questions or you need anything, don't be afraid to reach out as well. But I appreciate you all stopping by and hope you all can enjoy the rest of the day and have a happy holiday season for those who celebrate.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.